You know that feeling when someone completely ruins your day over something so petty that you can't even believe it's happening? Well, buckle up because what I'm about to tell you involves a parking spot, a woman who thought she owned the entire neighborhood, and karma so instant it'll make your jaw drop. I was trapped, humiliated, and absolutely furious, but what happened next was so satisfying that I still smile every time I think about it. This isn't just another parking dispute story. This is about the moment I realized that sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of justice, and honestly, I'm here for it. Let me set the scene for you, because context is everything here. I live in one of those apartment complexes where parking is assigned, you know the type. Each tenant gets exactly one spot with their apartment number painted right on the ground. My spot is number 42, and I've been parking there every single day for 3 years without a single problem. The spot next to mine, number 43, belongs to this woman I'll call Karen because, honestly, the name fits her personality like a glove. Karen moved in about 6 months ago, and from day one, she acted like she was the queen of the parking lot, constantly complaining about how people parked, where they walked, and basically anything she could find to gripe about. Now, I'm usually pretty easygoing about neighborhood stuff because life's too short to argue over nonsense, right? But Karen had this special talent for making everyone around her absolutely miserable. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes on cars if they were even slightly over the line, call the towing company on visitors who parked in guest spots she deemed too close to her precious space, and generally act like she was the self-appointed parking lot enforcer. I'd managed to avoid her wrath up until this point, always making sure I was perfectly centered in my spot, never giving her any ammunition. But apparently on this particular Tuesday morning, she decided it was my turn to experience her special brand of crazy, and boy did she come at me with everything she had. I woke up that Tuesday running slightly behind schedule because my alarm didn't go off. You know how it goes. One of those mornings where everything seems slightly off. I had an absolutely critical meeting at work, the kind where your boss's boss would be there, and being late wasn't an option. I rushed through my morning routine, grabbed my laptop bag, and headed down to the parking lot with about 30 minutes to make a 20-minute drive, so I had a tiny buffer. But when I got to my car, I stopped dead in my tracks, completely unable to process what I was seeing. Karen's SUV was parked diagonally across both her spot and mine, blocking me in so completely that I couldn't even open my driver's side door, let alone back out. At first, I thought maybe it was an accident, like perhaps she'd been in a hurry and didn't realize what she'd done. I looked around for her, hoping to quickly resolve this, but her car was locked and empty, and she was nowhere in sight. I called the apartment office, but it went straight to voicemail because apparently they don't open until 9, and it was only 7:45. I stood there feeling completely helpless, watching precious minutes tick away, knowing that my professional reputation was potentially on the line because of someone's inexplicable parking job. Then I saw it, a note tucked under my windshield wiper, and I knew immediately this wasn't an accident. The note was written in this angry, cramped handwriting that looked like someone had been furious while writing it. It said, "Maybe next time you'll think twice before parking so close to my spot. You can wait until I decide to move. Learn some respect." I read it 3 times, each time getting angrier because I had done absolutely nothing wrong. My car had been perfectly centered in my assigned spot, exactly where it had been every single day for years. This wasn't about parking etiquette, this was about control, about Karen deciding to punish me for some imaginary slight that existed only in her head. I tried knocking on her door, pounding actually, because I was desperate and running out of time. No answer, though I could swear I heard movement inside. I knocked again, louder this time, calling out that I needed her to move her car immediately. Still nothing. The woman was clearly home and clearly ignoring me, probably watching through her peephole and enjoying my panic. 15 minutes until my meeting, and I was still trapped in the parking lot. I called my boss, explained the situation, which sounded absolutely insane even as I was saying it, and asked if we could do the meeting via video call. He was not happy, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice, but he agreed, probably because the alternative was me not being there at all. So there I was, sitting on the curb next to my blocked-in car, laptop balanced on my knees, joining a high-stakes meeting from a parking lot because someone decided to have a power trip. My internet connection kept dropping because I was using my phone's hotspot, and I could see my colleagues exchanging confused looks as my video froze repeatedly. The whole thing was humiliating, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and rage. Every few minutes, I'd glance up at Karen's window, wondering what kind of person finds joy in sabotaging someone else's day like this. The meeting dragged on for an hour, and by the end of it, I'm pretty sure I'd blown any chance of the promotion I'd been working toward because I looked completely unprofessional. When the meeting finally ended, I just sat there for a moment, trying to decide what to do next. It had been over 90 minutes and Karen's car was still blocking mine, meaning she was intentionally holding me hostage at this point. I called the non-emergency police line, explained the situation, and the officer said they could send someone, but it might take a while because they were dealing with actual emergencies. Fair enough, but it meant I was still stuck. I took photos of everything, her car blocking mine, the note, my car perfectly positioned in my spot, because I knew I'd need evidence. Then I called the apartment management again, and this time someone answered, though they seemed completely unconcerned about the whole situation and said they'd look into it. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Karen finally emerged from her apartment, and the look on her face was pure smugness. She walked slowly, deliberately taking her time, making a show of checking her phone and completely ignoring me even though I was standing right there. I approached her, trying to keep my voice calm and professional, and asked why she'd blocked my car. She looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe and said, "You need to learn that there are consequences for being inconsiderate." I asked what I'd done that was inconsiderate, and she claimed that yesterday I'd parked aggressively close to her car, making it hard for her to get in. Which was complete nonsense because my car had been in the exact center of my spot, like always, and there's a full 2 feet between our spots when we're both parked normally. I pointed this out, showed her the photos on my phone from previous days, proving I always park the same way, but she just waved her hand dismissively. "I don't care about your photos," she said, voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe now you'll be more careful." She was actually admitting that she'd blocked me in as punishment, as some kind of lesson, completely unbothered by the fact that she'd potentially damaged my career. I told her I'd already called the police and the management office, and she laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Good luck with that, honey. I know my rights." Then she just stood there, arms crossed, making no move toward her car, clearly enjoying my frustration and waiting to see what I'd do next. Here's where things get interesting, because I'm a firm believer that karma exists, and apparently the universe was watching this whole situation unfold. As Karen stood there gloating, a tow truck pulled into the parking lot, which I found odd because I hadn't called one, and the police officer had said it would be a while. The driver got out, clipboard in hand, and started walking toward us. I figured maybe the management company had called him. But then he walked right past Karen's SUV and headed toward a different vehicle across the lot. Karen watched him too, that smug expression still plastered on her face, probably thinking this had nothing to do with her, that she was untouchable in her little kingdom of assigned parking spaces. But then, and I swear I'm not making this up, 2 things happened almost simultaneously, and it was like watching dominoes fall in the most satisfying way possible. First, a police cruiser rolled into the parking lot, presumably responding to my call from earlier. The officer got out and immediately spotted Karen's car blocking mine, and even from a distance I could see him shaking his head. Second, and this is the part that still makes me smile, a woman in business attire walked up to the tow truck driver, pointing at a different car while talking animatedly on her phone. I couldn't hear the full conversation, but I caught snippets, something about unauthorized vehicles and property management. Karen's attention was on the police officer walking our way, and she'd gone from smug to slightly nervous, probably realizing that maybe there would be actual consequences. The officer introduced himself, looked at Karen's car, looked at mine, and asked who owned the SUV. Karen raised her hand, suddenly trying to act sweet and reasonable, explaining that there had been a misunderstanding about parking spaces. The officer didn't look impressed. He asked her to explain why her vehicle was blocking mine, and she tried to spin this story about how I'd been parking inconsiderately and she was protecting her space. He asked her if she understood that blocking someone's vehicle was illegal, and she stammered something about it being private property and apartment business. He very calmly explained that regardless of the property type, intentionally blocking someone's vehicle could be considered unlawful restraint, and did she realize she could be cited for this? Karen's face went pale, and for the first time since I'd met her, she was speechless. The officer asked her to move her vehicle immediately, and she scrabbled to comply, suddenly all apologies and excuses. But here's where karma really showed up to the party. As Karen was fumbling with her keys, the woman in business attire approached us, holding up her phone. She introduced herself as the new property manager, said she'd taken over just last week, and she'd been reviewing tenant complaints. Apparently, Karen had racked up multiple formal complaints about parking harassment, aggressive behavior, and making threats to other residents. The property manager had been trying to reach Karen all morning to inform her that her lease was being terminated due to repeated violations of the community conduct policy, and she needed to be out by the end of the month. The look on Karen's face was absolutely priceless. She went from pale to bright red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She tried to argue, saying she was just protecting her rights, that other people were the problem, but the property manager cut her off. "We have documented evidence of your behavior," she said firmly, "including security camera footage of you deliberately blocking this resident's vehicle this morning." Karen tried to claim it was an accident, but the manager pulled up footage on her phone, showing Karen carefully positioning her SUV to block my car, then taking a photo of it with her own phone, clearly proud of what she'd done. The officer asked if the property wanted to press charges, and the manager said they'd consider it, depending on whether this resident wanted to pursue legal action, gesturing toward me. Honestly, I was in shock, watching this whole thing unfold like some kind of cosmic justice theater. Karen was now trying a different tactic, turning to me with tears in her eyes, saying she was sorry, that she'd been having a bad week and made a mistake. But the damage was done. She'd intentionally sabotaged my morning, nearly cost me my job, and shown zero remorse until the consequences caught up with her. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges for the unlawful restraint, and I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted her to face every possible consequence. But another part of me realized that karma had already delivered a much more comprehensive punishment than I ever could. I told the officer I'd think about it and follow up with the station if I decided to file charges. The property manager handed me her card and said the complex would be covering any costs related to this incident, including compensating me for the work meeting I'd missed. Karen moved her car, the officer gave her a written warning, and she slunk back to her apartment looking absolutely defeated. The police officer stayed for a few minutes, taking my statement and the photos I'd gathered, and told me I had 30 days to decide whether to pursue charges. Then he left, and I was finally free to go. Though the morning was completely shot at this point, and I'd need to do serious damage control at work. Over the next few days, word spread through the apartment complex about what had happened, because apparently several neighbors had witnessed parts of the incident. People I'd never even spoken to before stopped me to say they were glad Karen was finally facing consequences, sharing their own stories of her harassment. One guy told me she'd called a towing company on his elderly mother when she was visiting, claiming the guest spot she'd parked in was somehow Karen's territory. Another woman said Karen had filed noise complaints against her for playing music at 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday. It turned out Karen had been terrorizing the entire complex, and everyone was relieved that she'd finally been held accountable for her behavior. The property manager reached out to me personally to apologize for not addressing Karen's behavior sooner, explaining that the previous manager had been somewhat negligent about tenant complaints. She assured me that they were implementing new policies to prevent this kind of harassment, including installing additional security cameras in the parking area. I appreciated the follow-up and the professional way they handled everything. Within 2 weeks, Karen had moved out, leaving behind a trail of complaints from the moving company because apparently she tried to accuse them of stealing items they'd never touched. Some people, I guess, just can't help but create drama wherever they go. As for my job situation, I had to do some serious explaining and apologizing to my boss and the team. I showed them the police report and the documentation from the apartment complex, which at least proved I hadn't been making up some ridiculous excuse. My boss was surprisingly understanding once he saw the evidence, even admitting that the situation was so bizarre he'd thought I might be exaggerating. I didn't get the promotion I'd been hoping for, That ship had sailed when I appeared on that video call from a parking lot, but at least I didn't get fired. It took a few weeks, but eventually things returned to normal, and the whole incident became one of those crazy stories people tell at happy hour. The new tenant who moved into Karen's old apartment is a quiet retired teacher who bakes cookies for neighbors and actually follows parking rules. She introduced herself the day she moved in, and when she heard about what had happened with the previous tenant, she couldn't believe someone would act that way. It's been 6 months now, and parking lot life has been blissfully drama-free. I still park in the exact center of my spot every single day, but now it's peaceful rather than defensive. Sometimes I'll see that empty spot next to mine and remember that insane Tuesday morning, and I can't help but smile at how perfectly karma delivered justice. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned a few important lessons about dealing with difficult people and trusting that consequences will eventually catch up with those who think they're above common decency. First, always document everything. Those photos and videos I took were crucial in proving what actually happened versus what Karen claimed. Second, don't be afraid to involve authorities when someone is clearly in the wrong, even if it feels awkward or extreme. I hesitated to call the police at first because it seemed like such a petty dispute, but Karen had committed an actual crime by blocking my vehicle, and the officer took it seriously. Third, remember that karma might not work on your timeline, but it does work, often in ways more perfect than anything you could have planned yourself. The thing that still amazes me about this whole situation is how spectacularly Karen's plan backfired on her. She set out to teach me some kind of lesson about respecting her space, to punish me for an imaginary slight, to assert dominance in her little parking lot kingdom. Instead, she lost her apartment, got a police warning that will be on record, and became infamous throughout the complex as a cautionary tale about toxic behavior. All because she couldn't handle the simple reality that in shared spaces, we all have to coexist peacefully and follow the actual rules rather than the made-up ones in our heads. Her 2 hours of feeling powerful and smug cost her everything, and honestly, I can't think of a more fitting outcome. I never did press charges, ultimately deciding that losing her apartment and the police warning were punishment enough. Part of me felt a tiny bit of sympathy for her. Clearly, she had some deeper issues that went beyond just parking disputes, but mostly, I felt relief that she was someone else's problem now. The apartment complex actually sent me a formal apology letter and a gift card as compensation for the trouble, which was unexpected but appreciated. They also implemented a new policy where blocking someone's vehicle is grounds for immediate lease termination, which should prevent anyone else from pulling the same stunt Karen did. The funny thing is, I occasionally see Karen around town because we apparently shop at the same grocery store, and every single time she spots me, she immediately turns and goes the other way. No confrontation, no acknowledgement, just instant avoidance like I'm some kind of ghost from her past mistakes. I don't chase after her or say anything. There's nothing left to say, really. She knows what she did, she knows how it turned out, and she has to live with the consequences of her own actions. That's karma in its purest form. Not me getting revenge, not me gloating, just the natural consequences of her choices coming back to affect her life. So if you're dealing with someone like Karen, someone who thinks they can bully and manipulate their way through life without consequences, my advice is this: document everything, stand your ground, and trust that eventually karma will handle the rest. You don't have to plot elaborate revenge schemes or stoop to their level. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being the reasonable person who follows the rules while they dig their own grave with their terrible behavior. The universe has a funny way of balancing things out, often in ways more satisfying than anything we could orchestrate ourselves. And when karma does show up, make sure you're there to witness it, because trust me, it's absolutely worth the wait.